The autumn leaves danced past the tall windows of Rosewood Mansion, their golden hues matching the warm light that had always filled the grand old house. Arabella Fairchild stood in the parlor, her weathered hands tracing the intricate woodwork of the mantelpiece where 4 generations of family portraits smiled down at her. At 68, she moved with the quiet grace of someone who had spent a lifetime nurturing others, first as a kindergarten teacher for 35 years, and later as the heart of this sprawling Victorian home. The mansion had been in the Fairchild family for 150 years, its walls holding secrets, laughter, tears, and love in equal measure. Arabella could still hear the echo of her late husband Robert's voice calling from the kitchen, could still see their son David's small footprints in the garden mud, could still smell the Christmas cookies that had filled these rooms with warmth for decades. She was arranging white roses, Robert's favorite, in preparation for what would have been their 40th wedding anniversary, when she heard the familiar creak of the front door. But the footsteps that followed weren't filled with the joy she'd hoped for. "Mother, we need to talk." David Fairchild stood in the doorway, his 42-year-old frame tense with barely contained anxiety. Gone was the little boy who used to run to her arms. In his place stood a man whose eyes held something that made Arabella's heart skip with dread. "Of course, darling, I was just... This can't wait." His voice cut through her words like ice through warmth. "I've been thinking about your situation here. This house is too big for you now. You're getting older and living here alone. It's not safe anymore." Arabella set down the roses, her hands suddenly trembling. "David, what are you saying?" "I'm saying it's time, Mother. I found a lovely assisted living facility across town, Sunset Manor. They have activities, medical staff on call, people your own age. You'd be much happier there." The words hit her like physical blows. "Happier, David. This is my home. This is where your father and I built our life together, where you took your first steps, where Dad died 5 years ago." David interrupted, his tone growing harsher. "Where you're alone every night in a house that's falling apart around you. Look at this place. Mother, the roof needs work. The plumbing is ancient. The heating bills alone must be killing you." Arabella straightened, drawing on reserves of strength she'd forgotten she possessed. "The house is fine, David, and so am I. I'm not going anywhere." But even as she spoke the words, she could see something calculating in her son's eyes, something that reminded her uncomfortably of his wife Jessica's cold pragmatism. The realization that this wasn't just about her welfare settled in her stomach like lead. "We'll see about that," David said quietly, and for the first time in her life, Arabella felt afraid of her own child. The confrontation that followed would haunt Arabella for weeks. David paced the parlor like a caged animal, his carefully constructed facade finally cracking to reveal the desperation beneath. "You don't understand the position I'm in," he said, running his hands through his thinning hair. "The business is failing. Jessica's been on me about Emma's college fund, about the mortgage on our house. We're drowning. Mother, and this place," he gestured around the room, "this place is worth a fortune." The truth hit Arabella like a sledgehammer. This wasn't about her safety or happiness. This was about money, her home. "So you want to sell it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to secure our family's future. Your future, too. The money from the sale would more than cover your care at Sunset Manor for the rest of your life, with plenty left over for Emma's education. And your debts?" David's face flushed red. "That's not... I mean, yes, there are some financial obligations, but what kind of debts, David?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, David sank into Robert's old armchair, looking suddenly much older than his years. "I made some investments. bad ones. And there were some recreational activities that got out of hand. Gambling. The word hung unspoken in the air between them, but Arabella knew. She'd always known her son had weaknesses, had always covered for him, made excuses, smoothed over his mistakes. But this? How much? She asked. 200,000? Maybe more? The number stole her breath. David, I know how it sounds, but I can fix this. I just need the house sold. Need to start fresh. You'd be taken care of. I promise. Sunset Manor is really nice, and you'd have your own apartment there. Activities. Friends. Friends. Arabella's voice rose, surprising them both with its strength. I've lived in this community for 40 years. David, my friends are here. My life is here. The garden where your father proposed, the kitchen where I taught you to make pancakes, the bedroom where you were born during that terrible snowstorm, all of it is here. Those are just memories, Mother. Just old wood and plaster. You can make new memories. Just old wood and plaster. Arabella stood, her small frame somehow filling the room with presence. This house has been the heart of our family for 5 generations. Your great-great-grandfather built it with his own hands. Your father restored every room with love. And you want to throw it all away because you couldn't stay away from a poker table. David's face hardened. I'm trying to be reasonable here, but if you won't listen to reason, I'll have to explore other options, such as having you declared incompetent. You're 68 years old, living alone in a house that's too big for you, with no steady income beyond Social Security. How hard do you think it would be to convince a judge that you're no longer capable of making sound decisions about your welfare? The threat hung in the air like poison. Arabella felt something inside her chest crack, not her heart, but something deeper, her faith in the boy she'd raised, the man she'd believed him to be. Get out, she whispered. Mother, Get out of my house. After David left, slamming the door behind him with enough force to rattle the windows, Arabella stood alone in the sudden silence. The white roses lay scattered on the Persian rug, their petals like tears against the deep red fabric. For the first time since Robert's death, she truly felt alone. That night, Arabella couldn't sleep. She wandered through the mansion's rooms like a ghost, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floors that Robert had refinished by hand 20 years ago. In the moonlight streaming through the tall windows, every shadow held a memory. In the dining room, she could see 8-year-old David blowing out birthday candles, his face glowing with innocent joy. In the kitchen, she and Robert dancing to their wedding song while dinner burned on the stove. In the nursery-turned-guest room, the rocking chair where she'd sung lullabies to David, and later to her granddaughter Emma during precious weekend visits. How had that sweet boy become the man who'd threatened her today? When had love become transaction? Family become liability? She found herself in Robert's study, surrounded by his books and papers, the faint scent of his cologne still clinging to the leather chair where he'd spent so many evenings reading. Almost without thinking, she pulled open the bottom drawer of his desk, the one she'd never gone through after his death. Couldn't bear to disturb. Inside, beneath insurance papers and old tax returns, she found a leather-bound journal she'd never seen before. Robert's handwriting filled the pages, dates going back nearly 10 years. March 15th, Arabella doesn't know about David's gambling problem. Found out today he borrowed money against his house again. Should I tell her? She loves him so much, believes the best in everyone. Maybe I can handle this quietly. June 3rd, David asked for money again, $20,000 this time. Said it was for Emma's summer camp, but Jessica let slip that they're not sending her anywhere this summer. I said no. He didn't take it well. October 12th. Had the dream again about turning this house into something bigger than just a family home. Arabella would understand. She's always had the biggest heart, always wanting to help everyone. Maybe this old place could be a haven for people who need it, women and children with nowhere else to go, families who need a fresh start, the kind of place that heals hearts instead of breaking them. February 20th. David brought Jessica to dinner. They barely spoke to Arabella, spent the whole time looking around the house like they were appraising it. My heart breaks for my wife. She doesn't see what I see. Doesn't want to believe her precious boy could be so calculating, but I see the way he looks at this place now, not like a home, but like a commodity. August 8th. Chest pains again today. Doctor says stress isn't helping. Need to make arrangements. Need to protect Arabella and this house. David will come for it the moment I'm gone. Need to find a way to preserve what we've built here, to honor the dream of making it a place of healing. The final entry was dated just a week before Robert's heart attack. If something happens to me, I hope Arabella will read this someday. I hope she'll understand that this house isn't just our home, it's our legacy. Not for David, who sees only dollar signs, but for the world. This place has so much love in its walls, so much potential to do good. Arabella has the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. If anyone can turn our family home into a haven for those who need it most, it's her. I believe in her. I believe in us. Even death can't change that. Tears streamed down Arabella's face as she closed the journal. Robert had known. He'd seen David's true nature, had tried to protect her even from beyond the grave. But he'd also given her something more precious than protection. He'd given her permission to dream bigger than she'd ever dared. She looked around the study, seeing it with new eyes, not as a shrine to the past, but as the foundation for a future she was only beginning to imagine. A haven, she whispered to the empty room. A place that heals hearts instead of breaking them. For the first time since David's visit, Arabella smiled. The next morning, Arabella made 2 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Sarah Mitchell, one of her former kindergarten students who had grown up to become a family law attorney. The second was to Father Thomas at St. Fig Mary's, the priest who had officiated her wedding and Robert's funeral. Sarah arrived first, her professional demeanor softening the moment she saw her old teacher's troubled face. Mrs. Fairchild Arabella, what's happened? Over coffee in the sunlit breakfast nook, Arabella told her everything. Sarah listened without interruption, taking notes on a legal pad, her expression growing more serious with each detail. He threatened to have you declared incompetent, Sarah asked finally. He said it wouldn't be hard to convince a judge that I can't make sound decisions about my welfare. Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying Arabella with lawyer's eyes. At 68, her former teacher was still sharp as a tack, her silver hair neatly styled, her clothes pressed and appropriate. She moved easily around her home, remembered details clearly, and had managed her finances responsibly since Robert's death. He doesn't have a case, Sarah said firmly. You're in excellent health, both physically and mentally. You maintain your home, pay your bills on time, and are actively involved in the community. A competency challenge would fail. But he could try. Anyone can file paperwork. The question is whether he'd find a lawyer willing to take such a weak case, and whether he could afford the legal fees. Sarah paused, tapping her pen against her pad. Tell me about his financial situation. Arabella repeated what David had told her about his debts and failed investments. Sarah whistled low. $200,000 in gambling debts. That's serious money, the kind that attracts serious attention from serious people. She looked at Arabella carefully. I need to ask you this directly. Do you think David would hurt you to get this house? The question hung in the air like smoke. Arabella wanted to say no immediately, wanted to defend her son, but Robert's journal entries echoed in her mind. I don't know, she admitted. A week ago, I would have said never, but the man who was here yesterday, I didn't recognize him. Then we need to act fast. I'm going to file papers establishing your mental competency with the court, along with a restraining order if David tries to pressure you again. We'll also need to document your plans for the house." "My plans?" Sarah smiled. The first genuine warmth Arabella had seen from her all morning. "Mrs. Fairchild, you taught me in kindergarten that the best defense is a good offense. You want to keep your house. Then show the world and David that you have a better plan for it than just selling it off to pay gambling debts." Father Thomas arrived as Sarah was leaving, the two women exchanging pleasantries on the front porch. The elderly priest embraced Arabella warmly, his weathered face creased with concern. "I came as soon as I got your message. What's this about David wanting to sell the house?" They walked through the gardens as Arabella explained the situation. Father Thomas listened with the patience of a man who had heard every variation of human frailty over his 50 years in the priesthood. "I'm not surprised," he said finally. "Robert spoke to me about his concerns regarding David. He feared this day would come. He left me a journal. He had an idea about turning the house into something more than just a family home." Father Thomas stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "What kind of something? A haven, a place for women and children who need help, families starting over, the kind of place that heals hearts instead of breaking them." The priest's eyes lit up with understanding. "Like a shelter." "More than that, a community, a place where people could stay while they got back on their feet, where children could be safe and loved, where mothers could learn new skills and rebuild their lives." They had reached the old gazebo where Robert had proposed 43 years ago. Father Thomas sat heavily on the bench, gesturing for Arabella to join him. "Do you know what you're taking on?" he asked gently. "The paperwork alone would be staggering. Permits, licenses, insurance, inspections. Then there's staffing, funding, liability issues. It would be a full-time job, Arabella. And you're not getting any younger. I'm 68, not 88. I have years left in me, and I'd rather spend them doing something meaningful than sitting in some sterile facility watching game shows and waiting to die." Father Thomas chuckled. "You always were stubborn. Robert used to complain about it constantly. And you always told him it was one of my best qualities. Still is." He grew serious again. "If you're really going to do this, you'll need help. Legal help. Which it sounds like you're getting from young Sarah, financial help, which won't be easy. And most importantly, community support. People who believe in what you're doing and are willing to fight for it. Do you think people would support something like this?" "Arabella, in the 5 years since Robert died, you've organized 3 charity drives, volunteered at the food bank every week, and personally helped 6 families through rough patches. The question isn't whether people would support you, it's whether you're ready for how much support you're going to get." That afternoon, Arabella's house filled with visitors. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, her family physician, arrived to provide documentation of her excellent health. Margaret Chen and Dorothy Williams from her book club came bearing casseroles and outrage at David's behavior. Even Tom Bradley, the mailman who had served their route for 15 years, stopped by to offer his support. By evening, Arabella had a stack of character references, offers of volunteer help, and something she hadn't expected: hope. Sarah returned the next morning with a thick folder of legal documents and a gleam in her eye that reminded Arabella of the precocious 5-year-old she'd once taught. "I've been researching similar facilities," Sarah announced, spreading papers across the dining room table. "There are successful models all over the country. Family shelters that provide not just temporary housing, but comprehensive support services. Job training, childcare, counseling, legal aid, everything families need to rebuild their lives." Arabella studied the documents, her excitement growing with each page. How many people could we help? Given the size of this house, 5 to 7 families at a time, maybe more if we convert some of the larger rooms. The 3rd floor could be your private apartment, the 2nd floor could house families, and the 1st floor could be common areas and offices. They walked through the house room by room, Sarah taking measurements and notes while Arabella's imagination transformed familiar spaces. The formal living room became a children's playroom. The library remained a library, but one where kids could do homework and adults could research job opportunities. The large kitchen was perfect for communal meals and cooking classes. The zoning might be an issue, Sarah warned. This neighborhood is strictly residential. Then we'll change the zoning, Arabella said with quiet determination. The city council meets next Thursday. I'll be there. But first, she had research to do. Over the next week, Arabella threw herself into learning everything she could about running a family shelter. She visited 3 facilities in neighboring towns, spoke with directors and residents, took pages of notes, and began to see how her dream could become reality. The hardest part was deciding what to call it. She considered names like New Beginnings and Fresh Start, but nothing felt right until she remembered Robert's words from his journal, a place that heals hearts instead of breaking them. Haven House, she said aloud, standing in the empty nursery that would become the first family bedroom. That's what we'll call it, Haven House. The name felt like a prayer, like a promise, like coming home. 3 months after David's ultimatum, Haven House welcomed its first residents. Maria Santos arrived on a rainy Tuesday evening with her 2 children, 6-year-old Carlos and 4-year-old Sophia, carrying everything they owned in 3 garbage bags and a worn duffel bag. Maria was 28 but looked older, the kind of aged that comes from too much fear and too little sleep. Her left wrist was in a cast, and she flinched when car doors slammed in the driveway. She spoke in whispers, as if raising her voice might bring the danger she'd fled crashing down around them. "Mrs. Fairchild," she said hesitantly when Arabella opened the door. "Father Thomas said you might have room for us." "Of course, dear. Come in. You must be freezing." Arabella had prepared the blue room on the 2nd floor, formerly the guest room where Emma had stayed during visits. She'd filled it with small touches, fresh flowers on the dresser, children's books on the nightstand, warm quilts on both the double bed and the small twin bed she'd moved in for the children. Carlos and Sophia clung to their mother's legs, wide-eyed and silent as Arabella showed them around their new temporary home. But when she opened the closet to reveal toys and clothes in their sizes donations from her book club friends, Sophia finally spoke. "Mama, look, a teddy bear." The little girl's joy at something so simple broke Arabella's heart and filled it simultaneously. This was why she was doing this. For moments like these, when hope crept back into frightened eyes, that first night, she lay awake listening to the sounds of her house coming alive again. Footsteps in the hallway, a child's quiet cough, the soft murmur of a mother's voice reading a bedtime story. For 5 years, these walls had held only her loneliness. Now they held life again. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Dorothy Chen arrived. At 75, she was older than most shelter residents, but her story was heartbreakingly common. Her adult children had emptied her bank account and sold her house while she was recovering from hip surgery, then dumped her at a nursing home that took her Social Security checks and provided minimal care. "I escaped," she told Arabella with a mischievous grin that belied her circumstances. "Literally walked out while they were serving that awful lunch and kept walking until Father Thomas found me at the bus station." Mrs. Chen moved into the yellow room next to Maria's family, and within days had appointed herself the unofficial grandmother of Haven House. She helped Carlos with his homework, taught Sophia Chinese nursery rhymes, and became Maria's gentle companion during the long process of divorce proceedings and job hunting. The 3rd resident was Amanda, 17 and 6 months pregnant, who arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back and a fierce determination to build a life for her unborn child. Her parents had thrown her out when she refused to handle the situation the way they wanted, and she'd been sleeping in her car for 2 weeks before a social worker brought her to Haven House. "I don't need charity," Amanda announced on her first day. Chin raised defiantly. I'll pay you back every penny as soon as I get on my feet." "The only payment I want," Arabella replied gently, "is for you to help the next girl who shows up here scared and alone." Within a month, Haven House had transformed from an empty mansion into a home filled with life, laughter, and healing. But it wasn't always easy. The daily rhythm of Haven House evolved organically. Mornings began with communal breakfast in the large kitchen, where residents took turns cooking, and Mrs. Chen told stories that made the children giggle. Carlos had started speaking more, his English improving daily, while Sophia had begun following Arabella around like a devoted puppy, chattering constantly about everything and nothing. Maria found work as a housekeeper at a nearby hotel, her quiet competence and attention to detail quickly earning her supervisor's praise. She left early each morning with a determined set to her shoulders that grew stronger each day, and returned each evening with stories of small victories, a compliment from a guest, a conversation with a coworker, a paycheck she could deposit in her own account. Amanda finished her GED with help from Mrs. Chen, who had been a mathematics professor before retirement. The girl's sharp mind and stubborn streak served her well in her studies, and she began taking online courses in early childhood education while waiting for her baby to arrive. Evenings were Arabella's favorite time. After dinner, they would gather in the living room now furnished with comfortable sofas and a play area for the children. Mrs. Chen would read stories in her accented English, while Carlos and Sophia cuddled against her sides. Maria would work on job applications or study English grammar. Amanda would knit tiny sweaters and blankets, her face soft with dreams of her coming child. And Arabella would sit in Robert's old chair, watching this makeshift family she'd created, feeling more purposeful than she had in years. But not everyone was happy with Haven House's existence. The trouble started with the neighbors, the Weatherbys, who lived in the pristine Tudor mansion next door, began with polite complaints about the type of people coming and going at all hours. The Hendersons across the street worried aloud about property values. Mrs. Patterson, whose backyard abutted Arabella's garden, called the city to complain about noise violations and increased traffic. "Miss, it's not that we don't support helping people," Jennifer Weatherby explained when she appeared at Arabella's door with a petition. "It's just that this is a residential neighborhood. We moved here for the quiet, family atmosphere. Having a facility right next door changes things." Arabella studied the petition, which bore the signatures of 8 neighboring households, all requesting that the city investigate Haven House's compliance with zoning regulations. "Jennifer," she said calmly, "I've lived in this house for 40 years. In that time, your family has moved in and out twice. The Hendersons have had 3 different sets of tenants in their rental property, and Mrs. Patterson has called the police on every family with children who's ever lived on this block. The only thing that's changed is that now the people living in my house really need to be here. But surely you can see our position. I can see that you're afraid of people who don't look like you or talk like you or come from the same circumstances as you," Arabella replied, her teacher's voice carrying the authority of decades spent dealing with difficult parents. "What I can't see is how that's my problem to solve." Jennifer's face flushed red. "We'll see what the city has to say about this." After she left, Arabella found Maria standing in the kitchen doorway, having overheard the entire conversation. "Mrs. Fairchild, if we're causing problems for you—" "Nonsense," Arabella said firmly. "The only problem here is people who think their comfort matters more than your safety. Don't you worry about the neighbors, dear. We'll handle whatever comes." But privately, she worried. The petition could lead to zoning violations, fines, or even orders to cease operations. She called Sarah that evening to discuss their options. "The good news is that you're not technically operating as a business," Sarah explained. "You're not charging rent. You don't have employees, And you're not advertising services. Legally, you're just letting people stay in your house. And the bad news? The bad news is that if the city decides to crack down, they can make your life very difficult with inspections, permit requirements, and compliance issues. We need to get ahead of this. The next morning, Arabella began making phone calls to the mayor's office, to city council members, to the local newspaper. If her neighbors wanted to make Haven House a public issue, she would meet them head-on. But she wasn't prepared for the support that emerged. The article in the Millbrook Gazette ran on the front page of the local section, "Neighborhood Shelter Helps Families in Crisis." The reporter, a young woman named Jessica Park, had spent an afternoon at Haven House interviewing residents and documenting their stories with sensitivity and respect. Maria's story particularly resonated with readers, a young mother who had fled domestic violence with her children, found safety and support at Haven House, and was now working to rebuild her life. Mrs. Chen's tale of elder abuse touched hearts, while Amanda's courage in facing teenage pregnancy alone inspired admiration. But it was Arabella's motivation that captured imaginations. "My husband always dreamed of turning this house into a place that healed hearts instead of breaking them. After he died, I thought those dreams died with him. But when my own son tried to force me from my home for financial gain, I realized that healing broken hearts sometimes starts with healing your own." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The newspaper's phone lines lit up with calls of support. Donations began arriving in the mail cash, checks, gift cards, boxes of clothing and toys. Local businesses offered services, free legal aid from a law firm, discounted groceries from Miller's Market, free medical care from Dr. O. Rodriguez's clinic. The Millbrook Community Church announced that it would sponsor Haven House as an official outreach ministry, providing both financial support and volunteer assistance. St. Mary's Catholic Church followed suit, with Father Thomas organizing a monthly food drive specifically for the shelter. Even the high school got involved, with the senior class choosing Haven House as their community service project. Students painted bedrooms, planted a vegetable garden, and organized a furniture drive that filled the mansion with comfortable, child-friendly furnishings. The most surprising support came from an unexpected source, David's own daughter, Emma. The 16-year-old appeared at Haven House on a Saturday morning, her face set with the same stubborn determination that had characterized her grandmother at her age. "Grandma Arabella, I need to talk to you." They sat in the garden gazebo, where Robert had proposed, surrounded by the roses he'd planted for their first anniversary. Emma was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. "Dad told me and Mom that you were being selfish, that you were putting yourself in this house ahead of family," she finally said. "He said you'd rather live with strangers than help your own son out of trouble." Arabella's heart clenched, but she remained silent, letting her granddaughter work through her thoughts. "But then I read the article in the paper, and I saw the pictures of Carlos and Sophia and Mrs. Chen, and I started thinking about what you're really doing here." Emma looked up, her eyes bright with tears. "You're not being selfish, are you? You're being the same person. You've always been the person who made me cookies when I was sad, who taught me to plant flowers, who always had room for one more at the dinner table." "Oh, sweetheart, I'm ashamed of my dad," Emma continued, her voice shaking. "I'm ashamed that he would rather sell your house to pay his gambling debts than let you use it to help people who really need it. And I'm proud of you for standing up to him." Arabella pulled her granddaughter into her arms, both of them crying now. "Your father is still my son, Emma, and he's still your father. He's made some bad choices, but that doesn't make him a bad person. How can you still defend him after what he's trying to do to you? Because that's what love does, sweetheart. It forgives. Even when forgiveness seems impossible. It hopes for better, even when better seems unlikely. And it never, ever gives up on family." Emma pulled back, studying her grandmother's face. "Is that why you're doing all this, to show Dad what love really looks like?" Arabella considered the question seriously. Maybe partly, but mostly I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. Because I have this big, beautiful house and the ability to help people. And not using those gifts would be a waste of the life your grandfather and I built together. Emma nodded slowly. Can I help? Really help, not just visit sometimes. What about your parents? What about them? I'm 16, not 6. I can make my own decisions about how I spend my time and who I spend it with? Emma's jaw set in a way that reminded Arabella powerfully of herself at that age. Besides, Mom's not as convinced as Dad that what you're doing is wrong. She just doesn't want to get in the middle of a fight between you two. That afternoon, Emma stayed for dinner, helping Mrs. Chen teach Sophia to make dumplings while Carlos peppered her with questions about high school. She read stories to the children, helped Amanda with her online coursework, and pitched in with dishes like she'd been part of the Haven House family all along. As Arabella watched her granddaughter interact with the residents, she felt a deep sense of continuity, as if the best parts of the Fairchild legacy were being passed down despite David's attempts to destroy it. But she also felt the weight of the battles still to come. The neighbors' petition was working its way through City Hall. David hadn't given up on his demands, and running Haven House was harder work than she'd anticipated. At 68, she was often exhausted by evening, her arthritis acting up from all the extra activity. The question that haunted her quiet moments was simple. How long could she keep this up? The official letter from the city arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, just as the first snow was beginning to dust the mansion's roof. Arabella read it twice before its contents fully sank in. Haven House was in violation of residential zoning laws and would be subject to daily fines of $500 until it ceased operations or obtained proper permits for a commercial facility. The permit process, the letter helpfully explained, could take 6 to 18 months and cost upwards of $50,000 in fees and required modifications. Sarah arrived within an hour of Arabella's phone call, her professional composure barely concealing her anger. "This is harassment, pure and simple," she said, scanning the legal document. "The neighbors pushed the city into this action, and now they're trying to fine you out of existence. Can we fight it? We can try, but the law is pretty clear about residential versus commercial use. Technically, you're operating a shelter, even if you're not charging rent or taking government funding." Arabella sank into her chair, feeling every one of her 68 years around them. Haven House buzzed with its usual activity, Mrs. Chen helping Carlos with homework, Amanda folding baby clothes her son Michael had been born the month before, Maria getting ready for her shift at the hotel. How could she tell them they might all have to leave? The crisis deepened that evening when David arrived unannounced. His face flushed with vindication. "I told you this would happen," he said, waving a copy of the city's letter. "You can't just decide to turn a residential property into a homeless shelter. Mother, there are laws, regulations, procedures." "It's not a homeless shelter," Arabella said wearily. "It's people staying in my house." "It's the same thing. And now you're facing fines that will bankrupt you within months. Sell the house, Mother, before you lose everything. And let Maria and her children go where? Let Mrs. Chen end up back in that awful nursing home. Let Amanda try to raise her baby on the streets." David's face hardened. "That's not your responsibility. You're not their mother. You're not their grandmother. You're not their savior. You're a 68-year-old woman who's in over her head. And you're a 42-year-old man who would rather throw families onto the street than face the consequences of your own poor choices," Arabella replied, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. "My poor choices!" David's voice rose. "I'm trying to save this family. Do you have any idea what kind of people I owe money to? What they'll do if I can't pay them back?" For the first time, Arabella heard real fear in her son's voice. Not just worry about money or embarrassment about his failures, but genuine terror. "David, what aren't you telling me?" He ran his hands through his hair, pacing the parlor like a trapped animal. "The poker games. They weren't just casual Friday night affairs. These are serious people. Mother. The kind who don't accept excuses or payment plans." "You're talking about criminals." "I'm talking about businessmen who operate outside traditional banking systems," David said, but his attempt at euphemism fooled neither of them. Arabella felt the blood drain from her face. "How much danger are you in?" "Enough that I've been looking over my shoulder for 3 months. Enough that Jessica is talking about taking Emma and moving in with her sister in California until this blows over." The revelation hung between them like a physical presence. Finally, Arabella understood the desperation in her son's eyes, the real reason behind his increasingly aggressive demands. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I was hoping I could handle it myself. Because I was ashamed. Because—" his voice broke slightly. "Because I knew you'd try to save me, even if it meant destroying yourself in the process." They stared at each other across the room. 40 years of love and disappointment and misunderstanding stretching between them. "The house still needs to be sold," David said quietly. "Even if you hate me for it, even if it means those people have to leave. It's the only way to keep this family safe." Before Arabella could respond, a small voice spoke from the doorway. "Mrs. Fairchild, is everything okay?" Carlos stood in the parlor entrance, his 6-year-old face creased with worry. Behind him, Sophia peeked out shyly, clutching her teddy bear. David looked at the children, really seeing them for the first time. Carlos wore a t-shirt that said Millbrook Elementary Honor Roll and jeans that were clean and properly fitted. His hair was neatly cut, his sneakers tied, his face healthy and bright. Sophia's dress was obviously new, decorated with flowers that matched the ribbon in her carefully braided hair. These weren't the dirty, dangerous strangers David had imagined when he thought about his mother's charity cases. They were just children well cared for, loved children who happened to be living in his mother's house because they had nowhere else safe to go. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," Arabella told Carlos, her voice gentling automatically. "Mr. David was just visiting with Grandma Arabella." "Are you Carlos?" David asked suddenly. The boy nodded solemnly. "Carlos Santos. This is my sister Sophia. I heard you made honor roll at school." Carlos brightened. "Yes, Mama says if I keep working hard, maybe I can go to college someday like Amanda wants to do." "And who's Amanda?" "She takes care of baby Michael upstairs. She's really smart and helps me with my math homework sometimes. Do you want to meet her?" David looked at his mother, seeing something in her expression he hadn't seen in years, pure, uncomplicated pride. This was what she'd built here. Not a business or a charity project, but a family. A chosen family of people who needed each other and cared for each other and helped each other become better than they'd ever thought possible. "Maybe another time," David said softly. "I should probably go." After he left, Arabella knelt down to hug both children, breathing in the scent of their shampoo and the innocence that Haven House had helped preserve. "Grandma Arabella," Sophia whispered. "Was that man sad?" "Yes, sweetheart. He was very sad. Maybe he should come live here too. You always say there's room for people who need help." Out of the mouths of babes, Arabella thought, if only it were that simple. The next morning brought another crisis. Arabella was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard raised voices from the front yard. Through the window, she saw a black sedan parked in her driveway and 2 men in expensive suits standing on her porch, pressing her doorbell repeatedly. Maria appeared in this kitchen doorway, her face pale with recognition and fear. "Mrs. Fairchild, those men. They look like the ones who used to come to my house, the ones Tony owed money to." Arabella's blood ran cold. She quickly herded Maria toward the back stairs. "Take the children and go up to Mrs. Chen. Lock the door and don't come out until I tell you it's safe." The doorbell continued ringing, now accompanied by sharp knocking. Through the frosted glass, Arabella could see the silhouettes of the two men, and something about their stance suggested they weren't going to leave without answers. She called 911 first, then David. "They're here," she said when he answered. "Two men in suits, looking for you. I've called the police." Jesus. "Okay. Don't answer the door. Don't talk to them. I'm coming over." "David." "No." But he'd already hung up. The men were still pounding on the door when the police cruiser arrived, sirens wailing. Arabella watched from her living room window as the two officers approached the sedan, speaking briefly with the men inside before both cars departed. David arrived 10 minutes later, his face ashen and his hands shaking. "Are you all right? Did they threaten you?" "They never got past the front porch. The police sent them away, but David—" She gripped his arm. "This can't continue. You have to do something." "I know. I've been trying to figure out a solution that doesn't involve selling the house, but—" "No," Arabella interrupted. "I mean, you have to get help. Real help. For the gambling, for the debt, for all of it." David sank into Robert's old chair, looking defeated. "It's too late for that. Mother, the damage is done. It's never too late. Your father believed that, and so do I." She left him sitting there and went upstairs to check on her residents. She found them all gathered in Mrs. Chen's room, the children playing quietly while the adults spoke in hushed tones. "Is everyone all right?" Arabella asked. "We're fine," Mrs. Chen said firmly, "but we're worried about you. Maria told us about the men." Amanda, holding baby Michael against her shoulder, looked up from where she'd been pacing nervously. "Mrs. Fairchild, if staying here is putting you in danger—" "Absolutely not," Arabella said with more conviction than she felt. "This is your home, all of you. We'll figure this out." But privately, she knew the situation was becoming untenable. Between the city's fines and David's creditors, Haven House was under attack from multiple fronts. Something had to give. That afternoon, while David met with a bankruptcy attorney downtown, Arabella made a decision that would change everything. She called a press conference. The story that emerged over the next 48 hours was bigger than anyone had anticipated. Jessica Park from the Millbrook Gazette had been joined by reporters from 3 neighboring towns and a television news crew from the state capital. The narrative of a grandmother fighting to save both her home and the families she'd taken in captured public imagination in a way that surprised everyone, including Arabella herself. But it was the revelation about David's gambling debts and the threats against Haven House that turned the story from heartwarming human interest piece into a genuine news event. "Mrs. Fairchild has created something beautiful here," said Mayor Patricia Williams during an impromptu interview outside City Hall. "The question we need to ask ourselves is whether we're going to let bureaucracy and neighborhood prejudice destroy something that's genuinely helping people." The phone calls started that evening. Offers of legal help, financial donations, volunteer services. A law firm in the state capital offered to handle Haven House's zoning appeal pro bono. The state's Coalition Against Domestic Violence pledged $25,000 toward operating expenses. 3 different churches committed to ongoing monthly support. Most surprisingly, Arabella received a call from Margaret Walsh, a wealthy widow from the next county whose own foundation focused on women's issues. "I'd like to visit Haven House this weekend," Mrs. Walsh said. "I think what you're doing could be a model for other communities, and my foundation might be interested in providing significant long-term funding." But the most important call came from David. "Mother, I need to tell you something about the men who came to the house yesterday." Arabella listened as her son explained the full extent of his situation. The gambling had started small office poker games, occasional trips to the casino with friends from work, but losses led to bigger bets trying to win back what he'd lost, which led to borrowing money at increasingly unfavorable terms. The $200,000 I told you about, that was just what I owed to legitimate creditors. The real number is closer to $400,000, and most of it is to people who don't accept bankruptcy as an answer. David, I know. I know how bad it is. I've been living in denial, thinking I could win it back or somehow make it go away. But seeing those men at your house yesterday, knowing that my problems have now put you and those families in danger, his voice broke. I can't live with that. What are you going to do? I'm going to turn myself into the police, gambling with criminal organizations, taking money under false pretenses. There are laws I've broken. Maybe if I cooperate with law enforcement, they can offer some protection while they investigate the people I owe money to. It was the first truly selfless thing Arabella had heard her son say in years. What about Jessica and Emma? Jessica's already taken Emma to her sisters in California. They'll be safe there while I deal with this mess. And Mother, I'm going to sign over any claim I have to the house, whatever happens to me. I want Haven House to continue. Arabella closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. I'm proud of you. Don't be. Not yet. Ask me again in a year or two, when I've proven I can be the son you deserve. The zoning appeal hearing was scheduled for a gray Tuesday morning in December. Arabella arrived at City Hall to find the parking lot overflowing and a line of supporters stretching around the building. Her book club friends were there, along with Father Thomas and the congregation from St. Mary's. Dr. Rodriguez had closed her clinic for the morning to attend. Even Tom, the mailman, was there, wearing his best suit and carrying a handwritten sign that read, Haven House Saves Lives. Inside the packed hearing room, Arabella took her seat at the appellant's table next to Sarah, who had spent weeks preparing their case. Across the aisle sat the city's legal representative and 3 of her neighbors, including Jennifer Weatherby, who avoided making eye contact. The hearing began with the city presenting its case. Haven House was operating as a shelter in a residential zone without proper permits, creating traffic, noise, and safety concerns for neighboring properties. Sarah's response was methodical and thorough. She presented evidence that Haven House operated more like a large family residence than a commercial facility. No money changed hands, no employees were hired, no advertising was conducted. The residents were guests in Arabella's home, not clients of a business. But it was the testimony from Haven House residents that truly made the difference. Maria took the stand first, speaking in careful, accented English about her journey from a victim of domestic violence to a woman rebuilding her life with dignity and hope. Before Mrs. Fairchild opened her home to us, my children and I, we had nowhere safe to go, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. The shelter in the city, it was full. The waiting list, it was months long. Mrs. Fairchild, she didn't just give us a room. She gave us family. She gave us hope. My children, they are safe now. They go to good school. They have friends. They have future. Because of Haven House. Mrs. Chen followed, explaining how she'd been abandoned by her own children and found a new purpose helping the young families at Haven House. I am 75 years old, she said with dignity. I have been teacher, I have been mother, I have been grandmother. But never have I felt more useful than I do at Haven House. These children, they need grandmother. These young mothers, they need wisdom. I need to be needed. Mrs. Fairchild, she understands this. She makes place where everyone has purpose. Amanda's testimony was brief but powerful. Now 18 and attending community college part-time while caring for baby Michael, she spoke about the difference between charity and family. People want to help pregnant teenagers by telling us what we should do, by making decisions for us, by treating us like we're too young or too stupid to know what's best for ourselves and our babies," she said. "Mrs. Fairchild helped me by believing in me, by giving me space to make my own choices, by showing me that being young and being a mother doesn't mean I can't also be smart and strong and capable of building a good life." But it was Carlos Santos who stole the show. The 6-year-old took the stand with the seriousness of someone much older. His small hands folded carefully in his lap as he answered Sarah's questions. "Do you like living at Haven House?" Sarah asked. "Yes, it's the best house I ever lived in." "Why is it the best?" Carlos considered the question carefully. "Because nobody yells there. Because Grandma Arabella makes pancakes on Sunday and they're shaped like Mickey Mouse. Because Mrs. Chen teaches me about numbers and Amanda helps me read big words and baby Michael likes when I sing to him. And what about your mama? Is she happy at Haven House?" "Oh, yes. Mama smiles now. She didn't used to smile very much, but now she smiles every day. She says Haven House is where we learn to be happy again." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. The opposition's case crumbled under the weight of such testimony. Jennifer Weatherby's complaints about property values seemed petty and cruel when contrasted with Carlos's simple statement that Haven House was where his family learned to be happy again. The city council deliberated for less than an hour before returning with their decision. Haven House would be granted a special use permit to continue operations as a family residence with transitional housing services. The permit came with reasonable conditions: annual safety inspections, limits on the number of residents, requirements for adequate parking, but nothing that would force Haven House to close. As the gavel fell and the courtroom erupted in applause, Arabella felt Robert's presence so strongly she almost turned to look for him. He would have been proud. She knew. They'd done it. They'd saved Haven House. But more than that, they'd proven that sometimes the best way to heal a broken heart is to open it wide enough to hold the whole world. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came David's release from federal custody. He'd spent 4 months in minimum security prison as part of a plea agreement that had helped federal authorities dismantle a significant illegal gambling operation. The men who had threatened Haven House were now facing their own legal troubles, and the immediate danger to Arabella's family had passed. Emma had returned from California the week before her father's release, determined to be there for both her parents as they tried to rebuild their relationship. At 17, she'd grown up considerably during her months away, and she approached her family's dysfunction with a maturity that impressed everyone who knew her. "Dad's scared," she told Arabella as they worked together in the Haven House garden, planting vegetables for the summer growing season. "He's scared you won't forgive him. Scared Mom won't take him back. Scared he'll mess everything up again." "What do you think?" Arabella asked, handing her granddaughter a packet of tomato seeds. "I think he's been scared for a long time, and that's what got him into trouble in the first place. But I also think being in prison forced him to face some things he'd been running from." Emma was right. The David who appeared at Haven House that Saturday morning was different from the desperate, angry man who had demanded Arabella sell her home 8 months earlier. He was thinner, his hair now more gray than brown, his clothes simple and worn, but his eyes held something that had been missing for years: clarity. "Hello, Mother," he said quietly when Arabella opened the door. "Hello, David. Come in." They sat in the parlor where their relationship had nearly shattered, surrounded by the cheerful chaos of Haven House in full swing. Carlos and Sophia were playing with blocks in the corner, while Mrs. Chen read to baby Michael. Amanda was at the dining room table working on homework, and Maria was in the kitchen preparing lunch for everyone. "It's louder than I expected," David said, watching the children play. "Children tend to be loud," Arabella replied. "You were certainly no exception." David smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in years. "I remember. You used to say the house was too quiet when I went to school." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of life around them. "I owe you an apology," David said finally. "Not just for trying to force you to sell the house, but for everything. For being so selfish. For lying about the gambling. For putting you and these families in danger. For being the kind of son who would threaten his own mother." "You were desperate," Arabella said gently. "Desperate people do things they never thought they'd do. That's what the counselor in prison said. But being desperate doesn't excuse being cruel." He looked around the room again, taking in the evidence of the life his mother had built. "What you've done here, it's remarkable. Dad would be so proud." "He is proud. I feel him here every day." David nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Emma told me about the journal you found, about Dad's dream for this place. Would you like to read it?" That afternoon, David sat in his father's study reading Robert's private thoughts about his son's struggles and his hopes for the house. When he finished, he was crying openly the first tears Arabella had seen him shed since Robert's funeral. "He knew," David said. "He knew about the gambling, about the debts, about everything. And he still loved me. Of course he did. Just like I do. How can you still love me after what I put you through?" Arabella moved to sit beside her son on the sofa, taking his hand in hers the way she had when he was small and frightened. "Because that's what mothers do, David. We love our children not because they're perfect, but because they're ours. Because even when you're at your worst, I can still see the little boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers, who cried when we had to put down our old dog, who insisted on sleeping in my room during thunderstorms until he was 10 years old." David squeezed her hand. "I want to do better. I want to be someone you can be proud of." "Then help me here. Haven House is growing faster than I ever expected. We're getting inquiries from families all over the state, and I could use someone who understands business and organization. You'd trust me with that. After everything." "I'd trust you with anything, David. That's what family means." David's integration into Haven House happened gradually. He started by volunteering a few hours a week, helping with paperwork and financial organization. His background in business, while tainted by his gambling problems, had given him genuine skills in accounting and administration that Haven House desperately needed. Jessica was more hesitant about reconciliation. She returned from California willing to try to save their marriage, but it was clear that trust would take time to rebuild. She began attending family therapy sessions with David and spending time at Haven House, gradually warming to the work being done there. "I understand why you were attracted to gambling," she told David one evening as they walked through the Haven House gardens. "The excitement, the possibility of solving all our problems with one big win. But what I don't understand is why you couldn't just tell me how bad things had gotten." "Because I was ashamed," David admitted. "Because admitting I had a problem meant admitting I wasn't the man you married, the provider and protector I thought I was supposed to be. But I didn't marry you because you were a perfect provider," Jessica said. "I married you because you were kind and funny and you made me feel like the best version of myself. Somewhere along the way, you forgot that being human is more important than being perfect." Their marriage would require continued work, but the foundation was still there, and both of them were committed to rebuilding. Emma, meanwhile, had become an integral part of Haven House operations. She started a tutoring program for school-aged children, organized playgroups for the little ones, and began documenting Haven House activities for a photography project that would become her college application portfolio. "I want to study social work," she told Arabella one afternoon as they watched Carlos teach baby Michael how to stack blocks. "I want to learn how to help families the way you do, but with all the proper training and credentials." The success stories were multiplying. Maria had been promoted to head housekeeper at her hotel and was saving money for a small apartment where she and the children could live independently. Mrs. Chen had begun teaching ESL classes at the community center, her patience and gentle humor making her a beloved instructor. Amanda had completed her associate's degree and been accepted to the state university, where she would study education while Michael attended the campus childcare center. But perhaps the most significant change was in Haven House itself. What had begun as emergency shelter for a few families had evolved into something more comprehensive, a genuine community support system that helped people not just survive crisis, but build sustainable new lives. The transformation was formalized when Margaret Walsh's foundation provided a $1 million grant to establish Haven House as a permanent nonprofit organization. With the funding came the ability to hire professional staff, expand services, and begin planning for additional locations. "I've been running nonprofits for 20 years," Margaret told Arabella during the grant announcement ceremony. "I've never seen an organization that does more good with fewer resources than Haven House. You've created something special here, not just a program, but a philosophy of care that treats people as family rather than clients." 2 years after David's ultimatum, Haven House hosted its second annual Community Appreciation Dinner. The event had grown from a simple potluck in the mansion's dining room to a catered affair in the newly constructed community center on the Haven House grounds. Arabella stood at the podium looking out at more than 200 faces, residents past and present, volunteers, donors, city officials, neighbors, including Jennifer Weatherby, who had become one of Haven House's most dedicated supporters after spending time getting to know the families she'd once feared. "When my husband Robert first dreamed of turning our family home into a place that healed hearts instead of breaking them, I thought his vision was too big, too ambitious for an ordinary woman like me," she began. "What I've learned over these past years is that there's no such thing as ordinary people, only people who haven't yet discovered their extraordinary capacity for love and service." She spoke about the families who had found healing at Haven House, about the community of supporters who had made the work possible, about the staff and volunteers who showed up every day with open hearts and willing hands. But mostly, she spoke about family, not just the family she'd been born into, but the family she'd chosen, the family that had chosen her, the family that proved every day that love wasn't about blood or obligation, but about showing up for each other when showing up mattered most. "My son once accused me of caring more about strangers than about my own family," she said, looking directly at David, who sat in the front row with Jessica and Emma. "What he didn't understand then, what I'm not sure I understood then, is that there are no strangers here, strangers. There are only family members we haven't met yet." After dinner, as volunteers cleaned up and residents gathered children for bedtime routines, Arabella found herself in the garden gazebo with David and Emma, 3 generations of Fairchilds, watching fireflies dance among the roses Robert had planted so many years ago. "Do you think Grandpa Robert can see all this?" Emma asked. "I think he sees everything." Arabella replied, "I think he's proud of what we've built here, proud of how we've grown, proud of the family we've become." David was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "I spent so many years thinking success meant accumulating things, money, property, status. It never occurred to me that real success might mean giving things away, opening your home to people who need it, choosing love over fear." "It's never too late to learn," Arabella said, taking his hand. "Your father believed that, and so do I." As they sat together in the gathering dusk, Haven House settling into its evening rhythm around them, Arabella felt a deep sense of completion, not the completion of an ending, but of a beginning that had finally found its true purpose. She was 70 years old now, and she'd never felt more alive. 5 years after its founding, Haven House had become a model for community-based family support programs across the state. Delegations visited regularly to study their methods. Academics wrote papers about their approach, and 3 similar programs had been established in other counties using Haven House as their template. But for Arabella, now 73 and serving as Executive Director Emeritus, while David handled day-to-day operations, the true measure of success wasn't in awards or recognition. It was in the faces of the families who had found their way home. Like Maria, who now managed her own housekeeping business and had purchased a small home just 2 blocks from Haven House, where Carlos and Sophia could visit their grandma Arabella every day after school, like Mrs. Chin, who at 80 had become the unofficial grandmother to 47 children and had recently published a cookbook featuring recipes from all the cultures that had been represented at Haven House over the years. Like Amanda, who had graduated from the State University and returned to work as Haven House's family counselor, bringing her son Michael to work each day where he was loved and spoiled by everyone in the building. The mansion itself had been expanded twice, with a new wing providing private family suites and a separate building housing administrative offices, counseling rooms, and educational spaces. The grounds now included a playground, community garden, and small apartments for families transitioning to independent living. But perhaps the most important expansion was the Haven House Fellowship, a program that trained community leaders from other areas to establish similar programs in their own towns. The fellowship brought 12 participants to Millbrook each year for intensive training in the Haven House philosophy of family-centered care. "We're not just replicating a program," Arabella explained to the latest group of fellows during their orientation. "We're spreading a way of thinking about how communities can support their most vulnerable members. The specific services you offer will depend on your community's needs, but the underlying principle remains the same. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. Everyone has something valuable to contribute. And everyone belongs somewhere." Emma, now a graduate student in social work at the State University, served as coordinator for the fellowship program. At 22, she possessed a mature understanding of family dynamics and community building that impressed even seasoned professionals. "My grandmother taught me that the question isn't whether we can afford to help people," Emma told the fellows during one workshop. "The question is whether we can afford not to. Every family we help becomes stronger, which makes our whole community stronger. Every child who grows up feeling safe and valued becomes an adult who can make positive contributions to society. Every person who experiences true kindness becomes more capable of showing kindness to others." The ripple effects were visible throughout Millbrook. The elementary school where Carlos and Sophia had thrived now had programs specifically designed to support children from transitional housing. The community college had established a scholarship fund for single mothers. 3 local businesses had committed to hiring Haven House residents, providing not just jobs, but mentorship and career development opportunities. On a warm September morning, Arabella received a phone call that brought everything full circle. "Mrs. Fairchild, this is Carlos Santos. I don't know if you remember me." "Carlos." Arabella nearly dropped the phone in her excitement. "Of course I remember you. How could I forget my first little boy at Haven House?" Carlos was 21 now, a senior at the State University studying elementary education with a minor in Spanish language instruction. He'd called because he was doing a research project on community-based family support programs and wanted to interview Arabella about the founding of Haven House. "I also wanted to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything you gave my family, for the safe place to heal, for the belief that we could build a better life, for showing me what it looks like when adults choose love over fear." They arranged to meet the following week, and when Carlos arrived at Haven House, Arabella barely recognized the confident young man who walked through her door. He was tall and handsome, with kind eyes and his mother's gentle smile, wearing a university sweatshirt and carrying himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had overcome significant challenges and emerged stronger. "You know," he said as they toured the expanded facilities, I still remember the first night we stayed here. I was so scared, and everything felt uncertain. But you made Mickey Mouse pancakes the next morning, and somehow that made me believe everything would be okay. And was it okay? I mean, Carlos smiled, the same brilliant smile that had lit up the mansion's kitchen 15 years earlier. Better than okay. Mama owns her business now. Did you know that Santos Cleaning Services has 12 employees and contracts with half the hotels in the county? Sophia's in her second year of nursing school. And me? He paused, his expression growing serious. I'm going to be a teacher, Mrs. Fairchild. I want to work with kids who are going through what I went through. Show them that their circumstances don't define their possibilities. After the interview, Carlos asked if he could see his old room. Arabella led him upstairs to what had once been the blue guest room and was now part of a family suite occupied by a young mother and her twin daughters. It looks different, he said, taking in the fresh paint and updated furniture. Everything changes, sweetheart. That's the nature of life. But some things stay the same, Carlos said, pointing to the window where the same white curtains still hung, the ones he'd looked through as a frightened 6-year-old, wondering if this new place would be safe. The things that matter most, those stay the same. That evening, Arabella sat in her private apartment on the 3rd floor of the mansion, surrounded by photo albums chronicling 15 years of Haven House families. Hundreds of faces smiled back at her children who had grown up, mothers who had found strength, grandparents who had discovered new purpose. On her desk was a letter that had arrived that morning, one of dozens she received each month from former residents. Dear Arabella, I hope it's okay that I call you that. Now you always felt more like family than Mrs. Fairchild. My name is Amanda Martinez. You probably remember me as Amanda, the pregnant teenager who showed up at your door with nothing but attitude and determination. I'm writing to let you know that I just received my master's degree in social work and have been hired as the director of a new family support center being established in Phoenix, Arizona. When people ask me about my inspiration for this work, I always tell them about a woman who saw potential in a scared, angry 17-year-old and chose to believe in her when she couldn't believe in herself. You didn't just give me a place to stay during pregnancy, you gave me a model for how to build a life based on service to others. My son Michael is 13 now, can you believe it, and volunteers at our local food bank every weekend. When I asked him why he wanted to spend his Saturdays helping people, he said, because that's what the Fairchild family taught us. When you have something good, you share it. I hope you know that everything you built at Haven House is still growing, still spreading, still changing lives in ways you may never fully realize. The kindness you showed to one pregnant teenager has now touched hundreds of families through the work I've been able to do, and it will touch hundreds more through the work Michael will do when he grows up. Thank you for showing me what love in action looks like. With endless gratitude and love, Amanda and Michael. As Arabella finished reading, she felt Robert's presence as strongly as she had on the day she'd first read his journal, 15 years later. His dream of turning their family home into a place that healed hearts instead of breaking them had exceeded even his most optimistic visions. But more than that, it had proved something Arabella had always believed, but had sometimes struggled to live. Love multiplies when it's given away freely. Families can be chosen as well as inherited, and home isn't a place, it's a feeling of belonging that we create for each other, one act of kindness at a time, outside her window. The lights of Haven House glowed warm and welcoming in the darkness, a beacon of hope in a world that often felt too harsh and too cold. Inside those walls, new families were beginning their healing journeys, just as Maria and Carlos and Sophia had done so many years before. And tomorrow, as she had every day for 15 years, Arabella would wake up and ask herself the same question that had guided every decision since the day David had tried to force her from her home. How can I use what I have to help someone else find their way home? The answer, she knew now, would always be the same by opening her heart wide enough to hold the whole world, one family at a time. Epilogue. The House That Love Built. 20 years after Haven House first opened its doors, the documentary crew arrived on a crisp October morning, their equipment trucks causing quite a stir in the quiet Millbrook neighborhood that had once opposed Arabella Fairchild's vision. The filmmaker, a young woman named Sarah Chen, Mrs. Chen's granddaughter, who had grown up hearing stories about the magical place where her grandmother had found new purpose, was creating a film about community-based solutions to homelessness and family crisis. Arabella, now 78, but still sharp and energetic, welcomed the crew with her characteristic warmth. At her side stood David, 57 and bearing the quiet dignity of a man who had faced his demons and emerged victorious. His hair was completely gray now, but his eyes held the peace that comes from meaningful work and earned redemption. "Tell me about the day you decided to fight back," Sarah Chen asked, as they sat in the renovated parlor where the first confrontation between mother and son had taken place 2 decades earlier. "I don't think I decided to fight. Exactly." Arabella reflected, her hands folded in her lap. "I think I decided to love louder than the fear. When David demanded I sell the house, when the neighbors complained, when the city tried to shut us down every time someone tried to make me choose between my comfort and someone else's safety, I chose love. Not because I'm particularly brave or virtuous, but because love was the only choice that made sense." The camera panned across the walls of the parlor, now lined with photographs spanning 20 years of Haven House families, children who had arrived scared and hungry, now grown into confident young adults, mothers who had fled violence, now business owners and community leaders, grandparents who had been abandoned, now surrounded by chosen families who cherished them. "And you, David," Sarah Chen continued, turning to Arabella's son, "you went from trying to destroy Haven House to becoming its director. How did that transformation happen?" David was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. "I think the transformation started the day I met Carlos and Sophia, the first children my mother took in. I'd been thinking of Haven House as this abstract threat to my financial security, but suddenly I was looking at 2 little kids who just needed someone to care about them. I realized that my mother wasn't choosing strangers over family. She was expanding the definition of family to include people who needed belonging." He paused, glancing at his mother with an expression of deep love and respect. "The hardest part wasn't admitting I was wrong about Haven House. The hardest part was admitting that my mother, at 68 years old, was braver and wiser and more visionary than I had ever been. She taught me that you don't inherit character, you build it, day by day, choice by choice, act of service by act of service." The documentary would go on to win several awards and inspire the creation of 12 new Haven House model programs across the country. But for Arabella, the real measure of success wasn't in recognition or replication. It was in the continuing story of love multiplying itself in ways both seen and unseen, like Emma. Now Dr. Emma Fairchild Martinez, who had completed her doctorate in social work and was pioneering trauma-informed care practices for families experiencing homelessness. She had married Carlos Santos the previous spring in a ceremony held in the Haven House Gardens, surrounded by the extended family of current and former residents who had become as close as blood relatives, like Maria Santos, whose cleaning business had grown into a comprehensive property management company that employed dozens of people and specifically hired women transitioning out of difficult situations. She still lived 2 blocks from Haven House and still brought homemade tamales to the monthly community dinners. Like Mrs. Chen, who at 85 had written her memoir about finding family in unexpected places, the book, titled The House Where Hearts Heal, had become a bestseller and donated all proceeds to the Haven House Fellowship Program. Like Michael Martinez, now 23 and in his first year of medical school, who spent his summers working as a counselor at Haven House's youth program. He'd grown up calling Arabella Grandma, and had never known a world where helping others wasn't the most natural thing in the universe. And like David himself, who had discovered that redemption wasn't a destination, but a daily practice of choosing service over selfishness, love over fear, family over transaction. The documentary crew spent 3 days at Haven House, interviewing current residents, former residents, staff members, volunteers, and community leaders. They filmed the bustling community kitchen where everyone took turns cooking meals that reflected their cultural backgrounds. They captured the tutoring sessions where older children helped younger ones with homework. They documented the job training programs, the counseling services, the childcare co-op, the community garden where vegetables grew alongside flowers and hope grew alongside vegetables. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when they filmed Arabella reading bedtime stories to a group of children in the mansion's living room, the same room where she had once sat alone with her grief after Robert's death, the same room where David had threatened to have her declared incompetent, the same room where she had made the decision to transform her private sorrow into public service. As she closed the storybook and the children scattered to their families for final bedtime routines, Arabella looked directly into the camera. People sometimes ask me if I ever regret not selling the house, not taking the easy path, not choosing a quiet retirement over the chaos of running a family shelter, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived fully and loved deeply. But I can't imagine a life without purpose. And I can't imagine a better purpose than creating space for families to heal and grow and discover their own strength. She gestured around the room, where evidence of abundant life surrounded them, children's artwork on the walls, family photos on every surface, the comfortable disorder that comes from a house being truly lived in rather than merely occupied. This house has been many things over the years: a single-family home, a shelter, a community center, a place of healing, but most importantly, it's been a place where people learn that they matter, that they belong, that they have something valuable to contribute to the world. And I think, she smiled, her eyes bright with tears and joy in equal measure, I think that's what Robert meant when he dreamed of a place that heals hearts instead of breaking them. As the documentary crew packed up their equipment and prepared to leave, Arabella stood on the front porch of Rosewood Mansion, now officially renamed the Robert and Arabella Fairchild Haven House, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. The sounds of family life echoed from within, children laughing, adults discussing plans for tomorrow, the gentle hum of people who had found their way home. In 20 years, Haven House had helped more than 800 families transition from crisis to stability. It had inspired similar programs in dozens of communities. It had proven that with enough love, determination, and community support, even the most broken situations could be transformed into something beautiful. But for Arabella, the numbers were less important than the individual stories: the scared 6-year-old who had grown up to become a teacher, the teenage mother who had become a social worker, the elderly woman who had found new purpose in her final decades, the gambling addict who had learned to rebuild trust one day at a time. Each story was a thread in a tapestry of love that stretched far beyond the walls of one mansion in Millbrook, reaching into communities across the country where the Haven House model was helping families heal and grow and discover their own resilience. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Arabella whispered a prayer of gratitude for Robert, whose dreams had planted the seeds, for David, who had learned to tend the garden, for all the families who had trusted Haven House with their most precious possessions, their children and their hopes, and for the community that had chosen love over fear, inclusion over exclusion, possibility over limitation. 20 years ago, she had been a lonely widow facing the prospect of losing her home to her son's gambling debts. Tonight, She was the matriarch of a chosen family that spanned generations and continued to grow with each person who discovered that home isn't about blood or ownership, it's about belonging, about being seen and valued and loved exactly as you are. The house lights glowed warm and welcoming behind her as Arabella made her way inside to join her family, all of them. The ones who shared her blood and the ones who shared her heart for another evening of the most ordinary and extraordinary magic in the world, people choosing to care for each other, one day at a time. In the end, that was what Haven House had always been about, the revolutionary idea that everyone deserves a place to belong, and that sometimes the most powerful way to heal your own broken heart is to make room for someone else's healing too. The house that love built stood strong against the night, its windows glowing like beacons of hope, its walls holding not just the dreams of one couple who had lived there long ago, but the dreams of every family who had ever called it home. And in the morning, as she had every day for 20 years, Arabella would wake up ready to ask the same question that had guided her since the beginning. Who needs a place to belong today? And how can I help them find it? The answer would always be worth waiting for.